On today's episode of the podcast, I'll be getting you up to speed on the Something Old, Something New make-along that launches today, May 7th, and goes all the way to June 7th. I'll be sharing my progress on my submission for that make-along, and at the end of the episode, I'll be capping everything off by sharing with you a book review for a really exciting new-to-me book in the knitting community called Knitstrips. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, grab a cup of something cozy and let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Wool Needles Hands Knitting Podcast. My name is Tayler, and I will be your host. This is a video podcast primarily about knitting, though I do get up to other fiber-related topics from time to time. I'm coming to you from Henderson, Nevada, which is a small town outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, in the Southwest United States. This is where I am from and where I live with my husband Brandon, our boys Angus and Ronan, our dog Pepper, and our cat Oscar. It is Sunday, May 7th, and today marks the launch of the new Wool Needles Hands Something Old, Something New make-along, and I want to talk more about that today, share with you the details of the make-along, let you know how you can get involved, and share some of the progress I've made on my Something Old, Something New submission. I also want to share with you a really cool book review for a book that was sent to me by the authors that I think is just so fantastic and so unique and so engaging and original, and I think you're going to love it. But before I get into any of that, I want to cover a few admin details. The first being that Fiber for the People, my hand-dyed yarn business, is having a shop update this Saturday, May 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It's going to be a sock set only shop update. I'll be dyeing up several different color varieties of sock sets inspired by the paintings of Frida Kahlo. I have a feeling these colors are going to be gorgeous. So definitely keep posted for that. You can head over to fiberforthepeople.com or fiber.for.the.people on Instagram to keep posted about all things Fiber for the People. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. And I want to start this episode off with the Wool Needles Hands hashtag Something Old, Something New make-along. As I mentioned on the last episode of the podcast, the Something Old, Something New make-along is kind of an Earth Day adjacent themed make-along. The purpose of this make-along is to repurpose something and use yarn that we have from our stash. We don't want to go out and buy anything new. We want to use what we have. So it's kind of a more sustainable approach to making, if you will, but really it's just a nice way of being conscious of what you already have and what you didn't actually realize that you have, especially when it comes to harvesting yarn from old sweaters or thrifted sweaters or what have you. Essentially, and in a nutshell, what this make-along is creating new items, things that are functional from either repurposed yarn, old thrifted sweaters, or frogged works in progress, or even frogged finished objects that we don't find ourselves making any use of, while of course considering the gorgeous skeins that you have sitting around in your stash. A couple of the things that are off limits here are garments or any accessories that are worn on the body. So we're trying to think a little outside the box here. Things like bags, washcloths, pillow covers, functional items that are not worn on your person. Also, it's really important that you are not purchasing yarn for this project. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't purchase something for this project, and what I mean by that is if you happen to be at a thrift store and you want to get your hands on an inexpensive sweater quantities worth of yarn and you know how to unravel a sweater, and I have 2 tutorial videos that will help you do that linked down below in the description box, you can purchase a thrifted sweater for the purpose of harvesting the yarn for this particular project if you decide to do so. Now, I definitely suggest you watch my last episode of the podcast. I talk a little bit about my thoughts on this. It is not an easy process. It's not always the most economical. It's not always the most sustainable, as you're not guaranteed to harvest the yarn cleanly from that sweater. Things might go south. However, if you are well versed in this and you have practice and you feel confident about this, and this is an economical way for you to get your hands on a sweater quantity's worth of yarn, I absolutely encourage you to give it a shot. The thrift store is a fantastic place to find really great fiber contents and quantities at a really reasonable and approachable price. I wouldn't want you going online and purchasing yarn for yarn's sake. For this project, you're going to need to do some stash diving for that. Also, works in progress, things that are currently on the needles are off limits for this one. Typically, I'm really flexible about that, and works in progress are always welcome for make-alongs here on the channel. However, because this is a pretty short-term make-along, it's only going to be 1 month, and also because I'm trying to kind of add that challenge of starting and finishing something in that 1 month period, period. Works in progress for this particular make along are off limits. I am one that firmly believes that limitations foster creativity, and so I'm providing these limitations as a way to kind of encourage that creative thinking in you guys and myself as well. As I mentioned, this is a 1-month make along that launches today. So today is May 7th and it's going to go until Wednesday, June 7th. So you have 1 month, and that means plan accordingly. Don't, become too ambitious with the size of your project, because you're going to want to be able to complete it in 1 month. And then the kind of cherry on top, the one final thing that you have to make sure you include in your submission, at least one element of your finished object has to be repurposed. Now, if you are harvesting yarn from a thrifted sweater or an old sweater that you had in your closet, that can count as your repurposed element, absolutely. However, I challenge you and encourage you to maybe go above and beyond and find something that is going to be a little bit different from the yarn. I mean, listen, if the yarn is going to be your repurposed element, that is great. That's fantastic. I think that's awesome. But I am going to nudge you a little bit, challenge you a little bit to find something in addition to the yarn that can be a repurposed element. And what I have to share with you guys today will be kind of an example of that. In terms of sharing your progress, I will be hosting this make along not only here on the channel, but over on Instagram as well. I am not very active on Ravelry, and I know that a lot of you aren't on Instagram, and that is absolutely okay. If you would like to share your progress with me, please email me those progress photos over at woolneedleshands@gmail.com. Let me know if I can use your name or some kind of handle when I share your photo, or just let me know that you'd like to remain anonymous. And then also, if you are sharing your progress over on Instagram using the hashtag something old something new MAL hashtag, I may pull your photos to share here on the podcast episodes, and I will only use your Instagram handle as an identifier. So if you are going to share those photos over on Instagram to show your progress, just know that I may pull those photos to share here. In terms of submitting your finished object, all of that will be handled via email. You're going to email me your finished object, and in the subject line, put the hashtag, and that will let me know that this is your finished object submission or your project photo submission. It will just let me know that it is related to that make along, and I can organize all of those submissions that way. So all finished objects for this particular make along will be submitted to me via email at woolneedleshands@gmail.com. If you have any questions regarding the make along, drop them down in the comment section. I will do my best to answer them all. If it's a very pressing question, you can email it to me at woolneedleshands@gmail.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible so that you can get started and join us for the Something Old, Something New make along. Now, without further ado, I want to share with you something that I have on the needles as kind of my jumping off point for this particular make along. I gotta jump on this early, and so this isn't going to be my only submission for this make along because I did get a little bit of a head start, but I wanted to share it with you guys today to give you an idea of what that repurposed element might look like. I have had in my possession for several years now, kind of like a sewing bag or sewing tote that used to belong to my grandma. Now, I have to assume that this bag, I don't know, I want to say is at least 70 years old. And I've had it kind of just in my craft space for several years, and I really love it. However, the bag portion of this, and I'll talk a little bit about why this is disassembled in a second. Here's a photo of the bag in its entirety. So you can see it here. It has the wooden handle. I'm looking at this and I'm realizing as I feel this that it's just starting to get this brittle texture to it. It just feels like if I were to wash it to remove some of the staining that's happening here, it may not hold up to that many washes. It's just not going to keep itself. It's not going to hold up, it's not going to hold up for very much longer if I need to clean it or wash it. And so when I realized that we're going to be doing this make along and we need to repurpose an item, I thought, what better opportunity than to create a new bag to go with these handles? And that was my plan. And actually, when I shared with you the idea for this make along on the last episode of the podcast, I had not considered that. So this is something I considered since that video. I kind of saw it hanging in my office here, and it just dawned on me, like, what a perfect opportunity to replace the bag portion of the bag with something I made and to attach it to the handles from my grandma's original sewing bag. I don't know. It's definitely something old and something new. It's that perfect pairing. And I think it's so cool because My grandma was a really amazing woman. She was very crafty, and she learned all of her crafty trades from her mother, and her mother was incredible at sewing and quilting and crochet, and she was blind. And it's just, I love listening to my dad talk about that. I think it's fascinating what people can do with such extreme limitations. It's very inspiring to me when I think about that and I think about my grandma. It's cool. It makes me feel connected to my grandma, who is long passed, but it's just kind of a cool way to kind of reconnect with my grandma in that way. So that's what I'm going to do. Actually, that's going to be kind of my initial submission for this particular make along, is I'm going to be recreating the bag portion of my grandma's sewing bag. And as you can see here, I've already removed it from the handles. Now, on the last episode of the podcast, I shared with you some yarn that I had harvested from a thrifted sweater. And this is that yarn here. And I will be using this yarn in this project. And I'm actually pairing it with some yarn that I purchased at Michael's a few weeks back called True Boo. This is the label that came with it. So it's 100% bamboo rayon, and it's all bamboo. It's a gorgeous yarn that comes in really pretty colors. Let me see if I can show you all the colors here. But these are the colors that I purchased at Michael's. I have been dying to use these in something, absolutely something. I wasn't so sure about how this would work up for, you know, like a shawl or a bandana or something like that. But then when I realized I was going to be recreating the bag for my grandma's sewing bag, I thought this would be a really great way to kind of keep to the stripe, you know, vibe going on here and do my own little version of stripes while also incorporating the thrifted yarn from that sweater I shared with you on the last episode of the podcast. And so I've done that, and I'm so happy with the result. Now, again, I told you I got a head start, and I absolutely did, but it took me no time to complete what I have here, but it is so beautiful. So I have here a little striped motif for my bag, and you can see that it's being marled with that thrifted yarn, and it is so beautiful. I'm crazy about this. So this particular stripe right here, you can really see the marling with that thrifted yarn. But how pretty are all of these colors together? Let's just look at how pretty the colors are. I love the fabric. I love how squishy and drapey it is. It's really nice and durable, but it's also got some good stretch to it. Not too much stretch, which is nice. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just improvising a bag that I will then attach to these handles. Of course, the bag is going to be longer, but this is the vibe I'm going for, guys. Okay, so to achieve this bag, I was thinking like, well, maybe what I would do is just knit, you know, a really long fabric and then fold it over and seam it down the sides, which is essentially how this was constructed. But this is a woven fabric, it's not knit, and so it's just a little bit different. But then I got to thinking about the construction of the Eileen bag, which is one I talked about on the last episode as well. It's a knit market bag. That bag uses a flat panel stockinette bottom, and then stitches are picked up around the outside of that panel, and then the rest of the body of the market bag is worked in the round all the way up and until you finish, until you get to the arm strap. And that was what I wanted to do to create that bag shape with this. So all I did here was I created a tiny little garter stitch bottom strip. It's like a 1/2 inch wide. And then after I created that little garter stitch band at the bottom there that you can see, I just went around and picked up stitches all the way around and back. And now I'm knitting the rest of the bag in the round, all the way around. You can see here. I'm just knitting the rest of the bag in the round all the way up until it's the length that I need. And then from there, in order to create that little bit of like a split hem situation, I'm going to cast off. I'll work on one side of the bag at a time. So I'll go back and forth on one side of the bag, casting off stitches as I go to kind of narrow it down. And then I will continue knitting to a certain length so that I can slide it through the slot on this handle and then tack it down on the other side. I feel like this is really complicated and it's kind of hard for me to explain, but that's kind of the approach I'm taking. So I'm knitting this a particular length, and then I will be working one flap at a time, casting stitches off, knitting the length that I need to kind of feed it through the slot on the handle, and then tacking it down on the inside. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side of the bag as well. And that should give me a hand knit replica of my grandma's old sewing bag. I know exactly where I'm going with this. It makes perfect sense in my mind. I've sketched it out and it makes perfect sense there as well. And I really cannot wait to share more with you. And I know it's going to be finished super early. Like, we're just launching the Make Along. No rush. You have a month. But this is obviously getting finished early because I wanted something to kind of drive the Make Along and provide an example. But once I'm finished with this, I still have plans to create the Eileen bag. And this will be an additional submission of mine into this Make Along, and I want to chat with you a little bit about my yarn plans for this one. Okay, several weeks ago, I want to say like even 3 months or so ago, I purchased a couple of balls of yarn from an Etsy like thrift shop. So it's an Etsy shop, and what they do is they sell thrifted, kind of like antique or vintage craft goods. And I found this really fun viscose. It's cotton viscose with a little bit of nylon yarn on this particular Etsy shop. I thought it was really cool and unique, and I purchased it without any real plans of what I was going to do with it. Well, this knit along rolls around, and now I'm inspired to use it. So this is the yarn that I have from that same thrifted sweater that I'm using for this yarn here for this project. And I even have some more that I have to unravel. But I'm going to have plenty to complete this project and then complete an additional project, which is going to be my Eileen bag. So my Eileen bag is going to incorporate this thrifted yarn, which is probably, I can't remember the exact breakdown. I think it was like 95% cotton and 5% nylon, because it has this little bit of like a kind of a glittery gold fiber running through there. So I'll be using this, and I will be pairing it with this really fun yarn that I got on Etsy several weeks ago. It's called Frilly by Cessia. I had never heard of this. It's an old ball of yarn. I'm not exactly sure how old, but I can tell you that it is definitely older. And it said here, you know what I actually have? Okay. It says 60% cotton, 35% viscose, and 5% nylon. And it's made in Italy. And that's all 1973. So this particular lot comes from 1973, November 26, 1973. Wow. Okay. I didn't realize 11 years older than I am. Interesting. So that is really cool. So I purchased this on Etsy as like thrifted yarn, which is a really fabulous way to get your hands on some unique yarn. There are tons of options on Etsy. I will link to the shop where I purchased this. I mean, I can't guarantee this yarn is going to be there, but it's really fun to go and dive into Etsy looking for thrifted yarn, old yarns that have been discontinued. It's just an awesome thing to do. And that's where I purchased this. So I will be pairing this with my thrifted yarn from a thrifted sweater. This top yarn is the Frilly yarn. How cool is it? Oh my gosh, it's so funky here. Let's get up on that a little closer. There's tons of these little like Easter eggy colors in there, but then it's got that real deep navy fiber running through there as well. And it has like a texture, almost like a slubby texture to it. I don't know if you can see that very well, but I'm going to be putting these two together, hoping to get kind of a cool denim marled vibe with that navy going on in there, but something a little bit, more visually interesting because of the punch of like contrast with this yarn. It's going to be, mostly cellulose based, cotton fiber, which is going to be great for the Eileen bag. It'll be really nice and durable. I'm obsessed. I'm crazy about that. So I have plenty of yarn to do that because I have these little guys, I have this, and then I have some of the sweater left over, and then I've got these guys here. So all of these together are going to make my Eileen bag for the something old, something new make along. I have thrifted yarn, harvested yarn, and those are going to serve as my repurposed element for that particular project. So I'm crazy about this idea. I'm obsessed with this whole make along. I know a lot of you guys are excited about it too. So many of you have expressed in the comments of that last video that you have, you know, kind of heirloom sweaters sitting around that just, or not necessarily heirloom, but sweaters that were gifted to you that you know you're never going to wear. And this way you can repurpose that yarn into something new. Some of you have thrifted sweaters that you've had for a while with the intention of doing this, or works in progress that are just languishing. All of these things, I'm really excited that you guys are excited to get involved. And I actually failed to mention this, but it is a make-along. Crochet is absolutely welcome. If you're weaving something, that's great as well. It's fiber crafts in general, so bear that in mind. But these are my plans for the Something Old, Something New make-along. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know what your plans are. I would love to hear about what you guys have going. I am super excited. All right, I wanted to cap off this episode by sharing with you a book that was sent to me by Alice Beltran and Karen Marr a few weeks back called Knitstrips. This is a publication that is considered the world's first comic strip knitting book. It has patterns and tips and just really great information for knitters, and it is delivered and packaged in such an engaging and colorful way. And there's a lot of things about this that are quite, I don't want to say revolutionary, but just very thoughtful and intuitive. And I really love what's going on in this book. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read to you what's on this flap and kind of share with you what that is briefly. And then I've marked a few pages here of things in this book that really stood out to me that I found really valuable and really great reasons to make sure that you make this a part of your knitting library, because I definitely think you should. Okay, so this is described as a comic book unlike any knitting book you've ever seen. It's broken down into 4 comic books, and each comic book follows a different theme. The first is called OMJOM, which is an acronym, and it stands for One More, Just One More, and it explores knits that you never want to end, or those knits that you just want to keep working on and you want to never set them down, also referred to as potato chip knits. It also has one in here called Focus Pocus, which celebrates clever techniques that deliver big results. Now, according to some of my tip drops over in the Wool Needles Hands tip line, a lot of you guys would like to learn more about patterns that pack a punch in the technique department. You might be interested in that particular comic book within this overall publication, because that's what it kind of emphasizes. There's also a little comic book in here called Stash, which is an acronym that refers to skeins that are special and here. And it's really just in reference to special skeins that you have in your stash, whether it's hand spun or really luxe skeins that you've been saving for a special occasion. These are patterns that help highlight those special skeins of yarn that you have in your stash. And then the last comic book within this is called Bucket List, and that just presents patterns that are your bucket list patterns, ones you definitely want to knit to treasure for your lifetime. They're going to be those really special heirloom pieces. Now, in addition to those 4 little sections of the book that focus on those 4 elements, they follow this approach that lets knitters knit it their way in their size with any yarn. It says everyone is welcome, so come on in. This interactive knitting, which I thought was kind of interesting, it's especially because of my adventures with my Franken sweater, it kind of focuses on understanding what you want from the fabric and understanding your size and measurements and understanding the yarn that you want to choose and how to put all of that together to knit each of the items in here to those specifications. It gives you options to kind of be a little bit more flexible. Something that it said in here that I thought was really good, and it's just right kind of in my line of thought as well. In IK knitting or in interactive knitting, gauge follows fabric. Fabric does not follow gauge. It even says in here, IK patterns do not have a specific target gauge, nor do they provide specific stitch counts for sizes. Instead, each pattern offers yarn and fabric qualities that, in combination with the shape and texture of the garment, achieve the design. You start an IK pattern by determining the fabric you want, and then you measure the gauge of that fabric. I think it's really just ingenious. And I like that they take that approach. It lets the knitter know that they are in control of their project and that they can customize things. It doesn't have to be this cookie cutter outcome. I mean, look at the visual on this. Look at the format. I just love it. There's also a cookie recipe in here. And it's a fully customizable cookie recipe following that same interactive knitting concept. One thing I really appreciated as well is they have a technique index. So this provides you with all the different techniques that are present in the publication. And if you want to work on a particular one and you want to pull the pattern out of the book that features that technique, it takes you right to that pattern, right to that page. You can search it by technique. And I think that that's really smart as well and super appreciated. It has a gorgeous bonus pattern at the end for a really beautiful classic cable sweater by none other than Nora Gone, who is just, in my opinion, the cable knitting goddess. She can come up with, her cable designs are something else. I absolutely think they're gorgeous. They're intimidating, but they're beautiful. And this is nice. This is like having the, cable goddess herself hold your hand as you embark on your first cable sweater. Now, there's obviously a lot about this book that I really love. You can see the little flags that I've left here. I don't have the time to dive into everything in detail in this particular episode. The more that I use this, the more that I will share it with you here on the channel. So that is Knitstrips. It is by Alice Beltran and Karen Marr. It is so worth having in your library. It is available on Amazon. I will link to it down below in the description box. Get a copy, put it on your coffee table, put it in your craft room, read it because it is gorgeous, full of useful information and really beautiful patterns. I will say though, just know that going into it, all the patterns that are featured in here, the only image of the pattern that you have in terms of what's in this book is illustrated. So there are no photos of the pieces here, but if you go on Ravelry, you most likely will be able to find some samples that have been knit from others and you can get an idea of what each of the patterns look like there. But within the book itself, everything in here is illustrated. The illustrations are really well done. You do get an excellent idea of what the patterns look like, but if you really require that photo look at each of the designs, you might want to check Ravelry and see if you can find some of those in, samples that have been knit or other people's project pages. Well, that is it for me today, guys. I am losing my voice. The allergy season has really taken its toll on my voice. I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm capping it off here. It has been so nice being able to spend this time with you guys today. Thank you for taking the time to be with me here. If you are joining the Something Old, Something New Make Along, I'm excited to have you. Share down in the comments what your plans are if you have them yet. And don't forget to share your project over on Instagram using the hashtag Something Old, Something New MAL. I cannot wait to see what you guys come up with. Also, don't forget to check out the Wool Needles Hands merch shop and the patterns that I have for sale over at woolneedleshands.com. All of that really helps to support the work that I'm doing here at the Wool Needles Hands YouTube channel. It means so much to me, so thank you very much. If you took value from this episode or enjoyed yourself at all, please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, definitely subscribe, and click that bell icon so you can be notified anytime I upload new content here on the channel, which is every Wednesday and every Sunday. Until Wednesday's episode of the Midweek Ramble, happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon. Bye.